So in this section, we're going to talk about English colonies and expansion. And, you know, as was mentioned in the last section, it wasn't only the English that were trying to settle in this land, but it's the English colonization that is going to create or lead to the creation of the United States of America. And so that's why we focus then on this, and of course not as so much as on the French settlement, although we will still mention the French from time to time and some of the others settler communities. And this section, I'm going to just cover things briefly, and then eventually we're going to start really getting into more meaty topics, and we're going to kind of go into more things in depth, while here we're still kind of in the generalization phase of this class. And what I mean by generalization phase is that the further we go back, there's less information, and we're still in this time period that's a little hazy in terms of, this is the history of the United States. This still isn't the United States we're talking about, right? We're talking about colonies in the New World, and on a continent, as we mentioned, is referred to as America. In this case, like the middle section, right? And Canada is a part of that. In other words, that's early British colonization is dealing with Northern America, and there is no United States. So that's what we got to just keep reminding ourselves, that we're not in that zone yet. We're getting there, but we're not there, right? And yet we don't talk about the United States without going into the section. Now, when I was in high school, I found this to be kind of relatively boring first several sections in U.S. history, trying to draw cutouts of all the various colonies coming together and memorizing all the colonies. It just didn't work for me. You might have enjoyed it. I didn't. Now, what I want you to do, though, is to kind of just think about some general aspects of it that make it important. So, again, we're just going to cover some things briefly, get you some perspective on it. So, some of the first English settlements, here there's a map. You notice this is now Canada, and this is now the United States, and here's the section that we're talking about, okay? So Sir Humphrey Gilbert, this is the 16th century we're talking about, is a former governor of English colony in Ireland. Remember, we were talking about that. The English first attempting colonization of Ireland as they bounced into the New World, okay? And then Queen Elizabeth granted him the right for 6 years to, quote, inhabit and possess at his choice all remote and heathen lands. In other words, lands that are believed not to be Christian. Okay, if you don't know that term, heathen. Heathen and pagan, these are words we're talking about that mean non-Christian, people before they were Christian, okay? Or were never Christian. Not in the actual possession of any Christian prince, okay? And so in other words, that he has she's granted him a right to lands that are, one, not already Christian, because by people not being Christian, by default, they're being seen as, there's a right to subject them, okay? Now, I want to mention something when I talk about Christianity, which we'll definitely do off and on in this class, because Christianity goes hand in hand with European culture at this time, which we're a part of, and up until now. When I say Christian, many Christians are going to say, well, I wouldn't support, possessing lands of people that are viewed as heathens. And so I want to make this clear to everyone, that it's understand that when we say Christianity, like when we say Islam, when we say any other kind of ideology, those things are done in the name of those ideologies, and so historically we cannot remove ourselves from that to say that. But we have to always understand that not everybody agrees with things that are done in the name of their religions or in the name of their states or in the names of their ethnicities. So, I mean, it seems kind of funny for me to mention this now, maybe to go on about this for so long, but I think that it's very important because, right, I mean, Islam, every time there's a terrorist attack, Muslims have to explain, what does that have to do with Islam? And so I like to point out, when we talk about European Christian views about other people at the time that we're dealing with here, do Christians have to clarify that that's a part of their Christianity or not? That's just something I want you to think about, but I don't want to go off on that tangent too much. Just the point is I'm trying to say is that a European state under the name of Christianity is giving certain people the ability to take over certain parts of the world based on them not being Christian. And in the case of the Irish, they were on the wrong side of Christianity, right? The Irish were long converted, but now they were Catholic, and so there was a Protestant-Catholic divide. So that's also what I'm talking about. It's not just Christian versus the non-Christian, it's even Christian versus other forms of Christianity that we saw in Europe, okay? And we're going to talk more about that as we discuss some of the developments of the colonies, okay? Now, also it says, as long as they're not in actual possession of any Christian prince, meaning don't step on the toes of other European nations going in. We're not ready for a war just yet over land rights, okay? Now, if it was a Muslim prince, obviously it would have been different, but that's not, okay? Now, anyhow, so it says, PowerPoint in 1583, he took possession of Newfoundland, newfound land. And where's that at? It's very picturesque, nice picture here. I had a friend who was in the military. He was up there and he said it was completely boring, but it looks lovely to me. I don't know, whatever, So here is what we're talking about in Canada, which is now Canada, okay? We have some other important characters in other colonies that you have covered since high school, but again, does it stick? Why do we care? So Sir Walter Raleigh, also 16th century, early 17th century. He's the half brother of Sir Humphrey Gilbert. Also a former colonist of Ireland. He had an expedition to explore the American coast. He returned to England with 2 captive natives. That was the thing to kind of show. If you remember reading the Howard Zen book and the People's History, that from then till through this process, from Columbus on, there was this idea of, let's go show Europeans what a real native looked like. It's in a sense, it's kind of like a zoo. And zoos are controversial to animal rights activists, by the way, as a side note, for this reason. Let's take somebody that we've never seen it. And of course, they don't have TV screens back then or video cameras. Who are these people? They're not Christian. They're not European. They're not a part of our civilization. I want to see one, Okay, so let's bring them back. And many times the natives died before they could get back. They were basically hostages used to be paraded as a show for Europeans to see, look, here they are here. And by the way, this isn't just something that Europeans do. I had a professor, he's a Bengali origin, who was an Asian studies major, and he was fluent in Chinese, and he was talking to us when I was at UC Santa Cruz that under Mao in China, and if you don't know who that is, don't worry about it, but just to say, after World War II period, a communist who came to power, he was mentioning that many of the young intellectuals of his time, they converted to Marxism and they were excited, and they went to China. And in China, the Han are an ethnicity that dominate many other ethnic groups in China that aren't Han Chinese. And that there were some cultural displays in which he said him and his friends were shocked that people were put almost like in zoo-like cages to display the different culture of the Uyghur and some other people, kind of in the way that we're talking about here, this kind of zoo-like atmosphere of different cultures within China being put on display. So I kind of just want to make clear that this kind of horrific thing, it has been done in other parts of the world, even in modern times. Okay, so essentially then he names the region Virginia in honor of Queen Virgin and the Virgin Queen Elizabeth I. Okay, and that's where the term Virginia comes from. A colony was formed, and then in the 16th century it was found deserted. In 1603, Raleigh was accused of plotting against King James I and executed. That was that with him. Now, this lost colony here is a picture depicting it. And if you remember, we're talking about these kind of almost like fortified cities, just like in Ireland. These are kind of almost like military compounds in which you can ward off the natives and create this kind of little secured area. Okay, and yet something happened here. Did they get killed by the natives? Did they die from diseases? It's not known. There was this cryptic message written, Croatoan, that no one ever really had been able to decipher, and that was that. So I'm gonna end with this section here, and then we're gonna go into the next lecture on English colonization methods.